like, donut demand, or the quantity of donuts demanded. What this is saying is that, like, well, initially there was some relatively low price of donuts, right, which led to this budget constraint. In that scenario, the consumer wished to consume a relatively large number of donuts. So, price is low, quantity demanded is high. And then I said, well, the price went up. The price going up caused the budget constraint to rotate in like this. The consumer moved to a new indifference curve, and after everything was re-optimized, they chose D star 2, which is some lower quantity of donuts. Yeah. So you have a higher price, lower quantity. There's some new point here. Yeah. I could trace this out, right? Like I could say, well, if it got even higher and even higher and even higher and even higher, and get on a new indifference curve each time, and it would trace out some kind of line here. Yeah. This line is not just any line. What is it? It's the demand curve. Yeah. So on the first day of class, or the second day of class maybe, I said, hey, we're going to study demand. For now, I'll just say, like, obviously if something is expensive, people wish to demand relatively few of them. If they're cheaper, people wish to demand more of them, right? Demand curves slope down. There's some inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. And I said, I'm just going to wave my hands and just assume that for now. But I told you, I promised you, like later in the class, I'll actually give you like a rigorous sort of behavioral foundation for the fact that demand curves slope down. This is it. Yeah. Right? It's like saying we're not just assuming the demand curves slope down, right? We have like a model of optimal consumption, right? And one of the things that happens in that model of optimal consumption is that when the price of things go up, yeah, the new optimal consumption bundle results in a lower quantity of the good whose price went up. Yeah. Okay. This is a big wow moment in your microeconomic training. Yeah. This is why it's microeconomics in a way, right? It's because we're studying the choices of individuals. Yeah. This is a model of individual choice. And it's about something trivial here, like coffee and donuts, but we have a similar kind of model of individual choices for everything, for saving behavior and for fertility behavior and for job search behavior. I mean, like any kind of model, any important human behavior, things you traditionally think of as economics and things you don't traditionally think of as economics, right? It's a pretty widely applicable kind of framework. Yeah. It's got its own assumptions and things, which you can certainly challenge. Like maybe it's obvious to you just how much this downward sloping demand curve depends on diminishing marginal utility, right? Like if they did not have this shape, none of this would happen, yeah, or at least it wouldn't happen unambiguously, yeah. Diminishing marginal utility seems like a reasonable assumption, so maybe it's not a big problem, but don't be like blinded by sort of the analytical elegance of it or something, right? It's still just like loaded up with assumptions, but yeah, it's rigorous in some sense, yeah. There's an underlying behavioral model that leads to downward sloping demand curves. We didn't just make it up. Yeah. And we'll see something similar for supply curves later, where we think, well, firms maximize profits and firms have a certain cost structure, and that leads to upward sloping supply curves. Same idea, like a rigorous kind of underlying individual level behavioral model that aggregates to an upward sloping supply curve. Okay, good stuff. Okay, the last thing we'll introduce for today, and we'll spend a fair amount of time on it, we'll spend like the rest of the lecture on it, is this concept which we'll call income and substitution effects. I think I'll just give you like the idea verbally, and then we'll model them with the diagram. Okay, so the price of donuts went up and the quantity of donuts demanded went down. Demand curves slope down. That falls out of this model, the model of consumer choice. But if you ponder it, there are actually two distinct reasons why that would happen. Yeah. One, I think, is relatively intuitive, or is kind of like the more obvious one, right? Which is saying like, hey, when the price of donuts went up and the price of coffee was unchanged, donuts became like expensive, and coffee became like relatively cheap, and so people switched from donuts to coffee. Yeah, this is called a substitution effect, right? You substitute the relatively cheap good for the relatively expensive good. Yeah, and it's about the change in relative prices, about the fact that this line, this line is steeper than it was before. Right. So yeah, substitution effects are the response to the change in relative prices. If the price of something goes up, you substitute out of that and into something else. Yeah. Okay. On the other hand, something else happened when the price of donuts went up. Yeah. Which is that the consumer became poorer. Right? Their income went down. Their real income went down. Like their nominal income stayed the same. If this was, they had $100 to spend on coffee and donuts, they still have $100 to spend, right? But if your income stays the same and the price of one of the goods you consume went up, you've effectively become poorer, right? Your real income, your like inflation adjusted income, right, is lower than it was before, yeah? Another way of seeing that diagram is that in addition to being steeper, in addition to the red line being steeper than the black line, it's also just like further in, right? Like your income went down when the price of something went up, yeah? And when your income goes down, what happens to your demand for normal goods? It also goes down, right? And so, yeah, the fact that your real income decreased, that will also lead you to consume fewer donuts. Entirely aside from the relative price of donuts, just the fact that you're poorer will make you consume fewer donuts. Donuts are a normal good, we'll assume. Yeah? Okay. I'll start. Okay, and that fact, like the reduction in donut demand that follows the increase in donut prices, that is due to the fact that you became poorer, right? That's called an income effect. Yeah. So conceptually, those are the two things that lead donut demand to fall when the price of donuts goes up. Yeah. Okay. So if that makes sense, does it make sense? It might take you a while to wrap your head around. Yeah.
Is it as much your income as? Is it more your buying power, like your ability to buy a certain number of goods?
Yeah.
Is changing less than your income is changing?
Right. Your real income is changing. And what economists mean by real income is the buying power of your income.
Your nominal income remains the same.
Your income was $100, it's still $100, but that $100 buys you less. Yeah. If you're earning $50,000 a year and inflation is 10% and you don't get any raise at work, your income actually went down by 10%, right? Because of inflation. Even though the checks still say $50,000 on them. Yeah.
If it's like only donuts, that price goes up though. Like if you could just switch completely to bagels, would that mean that your real income is still going down, or just that the price of donuts kind of affects what you're buying?
Yeah. So donuts are one thing in your consumption bundle, but you're right that after the price of them goes up, they don't have to comprise as much of your income. Yeah. So you'll be able to offset some of the income effect by switching out of the expensive good, right? But your real income is still lower. So what we're going to do right now is actually try to decompose these things, and I think it goes right to that point, right? That I don't know how to phrase this. Like if the price of donuts doubles and you were previously spending half your money on donuts, right? Well, then you're like, well, your real income went down by a lot, right? There was a 50% price increase in something that comprised 50% of your budget. Your real income went down by 25% or something, right? But it didn't really, because you can switch out of donuts and that'll kind of decrease the hit, right? So yeah, the consumer will do that, and how it all shakes out is what I think we'll try to do right now. But yeah, they're definitely allowed to substitute out of them. Okay, so here's the thought experiment. Well, let me erase them. maybe something I should have mentioned too, is that both of those things, if this wasn't obvious, both the income effect and the substitution effect cause you to consume fewer donuts, right? Donuts both became relatively more expensive, and you became poorer, which for normal goods will make you consume less of it, right? So this is one of the reasons like we really think demand curves slope down, right? Is because when the price of something goes up, there's like two channels, both of which are pushing you to consume less of it, the income and substitution effect. In a second, when we think about the effect of an increase in donut prices on coffee consumption, coffee demand, that won't be the case. The income and substitution effects will be countervailing, yeah? But for the good itself, they both go in the same direction, yeah? But we still have this question, like how much of the reduction in donut demand following an increase in the price of donuts is due to substitution in response to the change in relative prices? And how much of it is due to, income effects, that is a reduction in real income causing you to consume less of everything, including donuts, yeah? So here's like the hypothetical thought experiment we'd like to conduct. I'll try to do along with the diagram. Coffee, donuts, budget constraint. Now I must be very careful with my diagram.